My son, my youngest son, Michael, has a severe disability with cerebral palsy. It's affected all of his physical abilities, and he's in a power wheelchair, uses a communication device, and requires 24-hour staffing for safety issues and for personal everyday needs. He recently moved into an apartment with 2 other housemates last June, and so we've gone through a lot of transitions this year between my retirement and his moving out of the family home. My pregnancy with Michael was normal. There wasn't, anything that was different with it. But when he was born, he wasn't breathing. Doctors didn't actually see it right away. When they placed him on my stomach, he was not crying, and most babies come out crying. And I said, "Why isn't he crying?" And they said, "Oh, he's just lazy." And then they looked at him and they realized he was not breathing. And they made several mistakes. And it was, from the nurse to the doctors. And it's unfortunate because then he suffered brain damage due to lack of oxygen. And there was a period of time where they told me he was going to die for about 2 hours, and I had even called my mother, who was staying with my 2 other children, to say the baby wasn't going to live. And but then they were able to get him breathing on his own. But when they realized it was a collapsed lung, which is not that uncommon, but that was 31 years ago. But they misdiagnosed it in the beginning, and it got kind of ugly. But when they went to inflate the lung that was collapsed, then they collapsed the good lung, and somehow the lung that wasn't working started working. So it was just like not a comedy of errors, but there were several errors that went on. They took him up to Riley Hospital from the Bloomington Hospital, and he was up there about a month. And then he came back to Bloomington Hospital for a couple of weeks, and then I got to bring him home. But it was probably, and the doctors would just say, well, he has brain damage. But they wouldn't give me any more information than that, other than, well, let's wait and see what he can do. Well, it's very difficult to wait and see what a baby can do, day after day after day. But, fortunately, I had 2 other children to compare his development to, and I knew he wasn't reaching the milestones and physically, but I knew that he understood what was being said to him, because he would look around the room and, look for his brothers or the dog or grandma or whoever was, I would say, where are they? And he would find them. So he seemed to understand everything that was being said to him. So I would take him up to Riley for his checkups and that, and so it was in the part of the intensive care unit that he had, been in when he was a newborn. And so the clinic that they have or had back then, I think they still have it, but I haven't been back to Riley for years. But it was a time when we didn't have the internet, and that information wasn't at our fingertips, and so you were dependent on people to give you information. Having 2 other children and a baby that required a lot of attention, going to the library was sort of out of the question to get information. But fortunately, we lived in Bloomington, and the institute was in Bloomington, and I was referred to the institute by the Riley Hospital that I should go see them. And, they were right there in Bloomington, and I didn't know about it, 30 years ago. So Michael was evaluated by the institute, and their evaluation came back different than what Riley's was. And Riley was telling me that Michael was severe and profound in all areas, which meant even cognitively. The institute, when they evaluated him, staff there, they said, well, he is severe, but it's not profound, and it's not in all areas. They said receptively he understands everything that's being said to him. So his cognitive ability is very high. But they said certainly a severe physical disability. So I had those conflicting sort of diagnoses, but there was the medical diagnosis, and then there was the people working in the field diagnosis, but I got a lot of information from the Institute in the early years. They provided me with good informed choices, and then they left the choices up to me how things were going to be handled with Michael. I'm sure I didn't always choose the best, or what they thought might be the better route to take, but it fit our family the best. And so, now when I work with families across the state or across the country, I let them know that, their voice needs to be heard, and what they may choose may be very different than professionals. But the professionals need to honor, what the family decides to do, because it's the best for their situation at their point in time. When Michael was born, or within hours after his birth, they had told me he had suffered brain damage. But it was probably 2 or 3 months after he was born when I went in for my checkup to the gynecologist. He's the one that said, "You really should put him in an institution." And I just looked at him and I was like, "No, why would I do that?" And he said, "Well, he's not going to be able to do anything." And I said, "But he's my son." So I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
That's okay. Well.
Even with including Michael in the general education classroom, and this is where I sort of parted my ways with Riley Hospital, or the physician that we saw there. But Michael was going to be included in the preschool, in the community preschool that I had chosen. And this physician just said that was the wrong thing to do, that he needed to be in a program for children with developmental disabilities, because he would just be ignored in a community preschool and he wouldn't survive or thrive. And she said he'll just be put in the corner, and he just will be neglected. But luckily I didn't listen to her. I listened again to the people working in the field at the Institute, saying, that's the best placement for him, and it's the general setting. So, the medical field has a very different view but had Michael been placed in an institution 31 years ago, he wouldn't have graduated from Ivy Tech.
Yeah, that's true.
He wouldn't have graduated from high school,
Yeah.
Yeah.